As tensions boil over once more in the Gulf region, an unexpected player has entered the conflict. Ukraine is now part of the fray, and it's doing a lot more than delivering its drone expertise to Gulf nations. Ukrainian soldiers are doing something insane against Iran. No one else could have done this, and the US never saw it coming. But for Ukraine, this is an opportunity to become a power player in a region where it once held almost no influence. Ukraine has sent more than knowledge to the Gulf. It has sent soldiers, and they are actively shooting down Iranian drones. That's according to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who dropped the bombshell when speaking to reporters about what Ukraine has really been getting up to in the Middle East. Did we shoot things down? Yes, we did. Did we shoot them down in one country? No, in several. Business Insider reports Ukraine's president is claiming during a closed-door briefing. This is huge. We already knew that Ukraine had sent experts to several Gulf nations to help them deal with the threats posed by Iran's Shahid drones. What we didn't know was that those experts would be doing far more than simply advising their new Gulf allies on how to use the interceptor drones that Ukraine is supplying. The experts seem to be soldiers. And they are bringing a far more direct version of their expertise than anybody saw coming. Zelenskyy added that Ukraine took part in air defense operations for several of its Gulf partners, though he declined to name who specifically benefited from Ukraine's shootdowns. What he did mention is that Ukraine has already received compensation for its efforts. We are helping strengthen their security in exchange for contributions to our country's resilience. This is far more than simply receiving money, the Ukrainian president claimed. Business Insider says that these contributions amounted to weapons that Ukraine can use in its war against Russia, along with oil, diesel, and direct financial support, all of which will help Ukraine to overcome Russia's attritional campaign. There's a lot more to say about Ukraine's dealings with the Gulf nations that have been impacted by Operation Epic Fury. We'll tell you about how things have gotten very serious in that department later. Before this news broke, Ukraine had confirmed the deployment of 228 drone experts to the Gulf region. We thought those experts would be aiding Ukraine's Gulf partners in developing air defense systems that are capable of dealing with Iran's drone threat. That still seems to be the case, but Zelenskyy says that it's so much more than that, stating during the closed briefing, "This was not about a training mission or exercises, but about support in building a modern air defense system that can actually work." This is Ukraine doing more than being a weapons provider. It's now a direct influence on what is happening to the Gulf nations as a result of Operation Epic Fury and Iran's responses. One important thing to note here is that all of this happened before the ceasefire was announced between the US, Israel, and Iran. That tentative ceasefire still held at the time of AP News report on Ukraine's direct involvement in Gulf state air defenses. At the time, conversations were happening between the US and Iran, meaning that the Shahids that Iran had been firing at its Gulf neighbors were no longer in the skies. But that's about to change. The ceasefire is broken. US President Donald Trump announced the failure of talks with Iran in a pair of Truth Social posts where he placed the blame squarely at Iran's doorstep for its refusal to give up its nuclear program. The meeting with Iran began early in the morning and lasted throughout the night, close to 20 hours. I could go into great detail and talk about much that has been gotten, but there is only one thing that matters. Iran is unwilling to give up its nuclear ambitions, Trump declared. He also announced that the US will be instituting a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz to counteract Iran's blocking of the key waterway. With the conflict reignited, the inevitable is almost certain to happen. Iran will start deploying its Shahid drones within the Strait of Hormuz once again. But even more worrying for the Gulf states is that those same drones, along with Iranian missiles, will start flying towards military bases and infrastructure on their territory once again. Ukraine has proven that it can help the Gulf states to defend themselves. Now that the ceasefire between the US and Iran is broken, the odds are that the Ukrainian soldiers in those states are going to be involved in yet more destruction of Iran's drones. But let's come back to what Ukraine has confirmed itself to have done. What we see here is a clear escalation. What was once thought to be a sharing of expertise is, in fact, direct action being taken by Ukrainian soldiers on Middle Eastern soil. The question now is why Ukraine's new Gulf allies would need it in the first place. After all, many are allies of the US, and they have modern air defense systems of their own to deal with Iranian drones. Why would they need Ukraine and its soldiers at all to help them develop what Zelenskyy says are air defenses to deal with a modern threat? The answer can be summed up in two words: interceptor drones. Zelenskyy has confirmed that the Ukrainian soldiers working in the Middle East have been using domestically made interceptor drones to take down Iranian Shahid drones on behalf of their partners. Those interceptors are now being integrated into Gulf state air defenses, and Ukraine is making it very clear that it's willing to provide more as long as the nations it's helping are willing to offer their support. Up to 1,000 Ukrainian interceptor drones could head to the Gulf every day, Zelenskyy claimed back in March, and that's especially the case if Ukraine's Middle Eastern partners help to fund the production of the drones. This is a quid pro quo arrangement that serves as a win-win for Ukraine as it gets to build interceptors that strengthen partnerships and power up its own defenses. The latter point is especially important, as more interceptors that Ukraine can build for itself serve two purposes. First, Ukraine gets to further prove the effectiveness of a technology that has already proven attractive to Gulf-based suitors and may soon be in demand by nations all over the world. Ukraine's interceptors are cheap, keep that in mind, and they're also simple to use. Al Jazeera reports that they are piloted by drone operators who use special first-person view or FPV goggles to pilot them toward incoming strike drones. Ukraine has several interceptor drones, many of which were developed in 2025. The Sting is perhaps the most famous, as it can reach speeds of up to 343 kilometers or 213 miles per hour, and it uses thermal imaging cameras to locate targets. Shaped like a bullet, Sting is also a perfect representation of what an interceptor drone does, which is to use a combination of its own kinetic energy and in some cases a very small warhead to hit a Shahid drone carrying a large warhead. That collision is enough to make the Shahid explode, turning it into a non-factor. Other Ukrainian interceptor drones include the P-1 Sun and Bullet, both of which are 3D printed, with the latter also using some form of artificial intelligence or AI in its guidance systems. So Ukraine clearly has options for any international partners who want to buy. And if it's going to start working directly with those partners, as it is with the Gulf nations, it'll be able to shop around its interceptor drones and make plenty of money to fund its war effort against Russia. Then there's the other part of the arrangement that Ukraine has with its Gulf partners. Zelenskyy has said that the Gulf states benefiting from Ukraine's drones are also helping to fund their manufacturing. That's huge for Ukraine, as interceptors have become a massive part of its air defense strategy against Russia. On April 1st, Defense News reported that Ukraine achieved an 89.9% interception rate against Russian missiles and drones. That's notable because it's a clear improvement over previous months. In February, the interception rate was 85.6%, which was itself a massive leap up from the 80.2% rate recorded in December 2025. What we see here is a pattern of interception improvement that uncoincidentally aligns with Ukraine introducing more interceptor drones into its air defense network. Ukraine's air defenses are now improving to the point where they're able to nullify Russia's own increasing reliance on long-range Shahid-type attack drones. Ukraine is now pushing for a 95% interception rate and hopes to receive the funding needed to build 2,000 of its interceptor drones per day. Sending soldiers to the Gulf to showcase the effectiveness of these drones is a great way to do that. Money will come pouring in as the Gulf nations buy more of Ukraine's interceptors, which in turn allows Ukraine to build more of the very drones it's selling so it can defend itself against Russia. It's a cycle of air defense improvement that Russia never saw coming, and it may only exist because of the irony of Russia using Iranian tech to attack Ukraine. The circle of military life goes round, and it's Russia and Iran that are finding themselves in the jaws of the Ukrainian lion right now. But there's another factor feeding into the Gulf nations being so keen to get their hands on Ukrainian interceptor drones and soldiers who know how to use them. But before we dig into that, if this is the kind of insight that you want to see, make sure that you are subscribed to The Military Show. We break it down like this every single week. So the other factor. We touched on it earlier, the price is very, very right for the Gulf nations that are buying Ukraine's interceptors right now. Those Gulf nations are equipped with air defense systems that fire missiles at incoming threats. That's all well and good when we're talking about missile-on-missile violence. But when those air defense missiles are taking out Shahids, a cost disparity arises. Take Patriot PAC-3 interceptor missiles as an example. Business Insider says that these missiles cost $3.7 million each. As for a Shahid drone, that costs Iran up to $50,000. Iran can build 74 Shahid drones for every PAC-3 missile, and that's the sort of cost difference that quickly wears down an air defense network that simply isn't equipped for dealing with Iran's cheap weapons. The obvious counter is to go even cheaper, and that's where Ukraine's interceptor drones and the experts who are firing them in the Gulf come into play. Ukraine's interceptors can cost as little as $1,000 to produce, which flips the tables on Iran's strategy entirely. Now it's 50 interceptor drones to one Shahid rather than dozens of Shahids to one missile. Even at the higher export price of around $6,000 that Business Insider quotes, that still amounts to about 9 interceptors being built for the price of a single Shahid. Ukraine's Gulf partners go from burning money to shattering Shahids cost-effectively. And to tie a nice little bow into the burgeoning Gulf partnerships that Ukraine is building, what we're seeing from today's interceptor drones is just the starting point. On April 9th, the Kyiv Post revealed that Russian sources are now claiming that Ukraine has come up with a new strategy for giving its FPV drones more range. Those drones are now being equipped with wings in a move that the outlet says is designed to make interceptor drones that are capable of attacking Russian aircraft and other targets at greater range. Ukraine isn't resting on its laurels when it comes to its interceptor drones. It's making them stronger and even more impressive, all of which can benefit the Gulf states that are working with Ukraine. So we have two parts to the story. One covers much of what we already knew about Ukraine's work in the Gulf. Interceptor drones are arriving in large quantities and they're being used to shoot down Iranian Shahids before they can cause damage. The second part is that Ukraine's experts aren't just handing out advice, they're getting involved. They're destroying Iranian Shahids for their Gulf partners in a move that is very intentionally designed to strengthen Ukraine's position in the Middle East. It's also a move that will infuriate Iran. We'll get to that in a moment. For Ukraine, it has revealed its very active role in the Gulf because it stands to gain massively from the relationships that it's developing in that region. Toward the end of March, Ukraine revealed that it had signed 10-year defense partnerships with 3 Gulf states following Zelensky's tour of the Middle East, which took in Qatar, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, or UAE. Of the 4, all but Jordan signed the decade-long defense deals. That also gives us a clue as to where Ukraine's interceptor drones are working right now. Zelenskyy may be unwilling to name the countries, but 3 defense deals pretty much tells us that it's either Qatar, Saudi Arabia, or the UAE, or perhaps even all 3. These partnerships are seeing Ukraine do more than provide interceptor drones, as Zelenskyy reveals. Not just interceptors alone, but also defense lines, software, electronic warfare systems, and so on. In other words, we are taking a systemic approach to this, Ukraine's president claimed when discussing the deals. In return, Ukraine is getting the fuel, energy resources, weapons, and cash that we already mentioned. However, it's also getting something that in the long term could prove even more important than all 4 of those things: influence in the Middle East. Ukraine is in the midst of carrying out a remarkable transformation that would likely have never been on the cards if Putin hadn't made the stupid decision to invade Ukraine's territory over 4 years ago. We've seen that transformation take place in real time. Ukraine has gone from being a bit-part player, especially in regions of the Middle East, to a country that needed the support of Western allies to survive Russia's initial onslaught. That support came and allowed Ukraine to strengthen its position in Europe and the collective West in the process. Influence grew. As the Ukraine war pushed on into multiple years, Ukraine has developed a domestic defense industry that is the envy of many other nations. Yes, it still receives support, but it's also established itself as the global leader in the drone space. And through that development, Ukraine has opened the door to partnerships like those that we're seeing in the Middle East right now. A country that was once a recipient is now a provider. And Ukraine is completing this transformation as Russia's influence in the very regions where Ukraine's influence grows is on the wane. In the Middle East, Putin stands on the precipice of losing Iran as a partner, though much depends on the outcome of Operation Epic Fury. He has certainly lost any influence he might have had in the other Gulf nations that are being targeted by Iran right now. Putin has also lost his influence in Syria, and in Europe, a man who is trying to intimidate an entire continent is now watching as most of the countries on that continent wake up to the threat he poses. The Atlantic Council notes that several NATO countries are now turning to Ukraine to improve their own defenses against Russia's war machine. Who knows? Maybe we'll start seeing Ukrainian interceptor drone operators shooting down Russian Shahid types over places like Poland and Romania, much as we're seeing in the Gulf. Then there's the US. It's fair to say that Ukraine's relationship with the US has been difficult over the past year or so, even contentious at some points. US-led peace talks between Ukraine and Russia have made no real progress on key issues, and Ukraine has had to grapple with the US paying more attention to Iran than helping it to deal with its Russian crisis in recent months. Zelenskyy is trying to counteract these problems. As AP News reports, the Ukrainian president has urged the US envoys Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff to visit Kyiv, and he has even proposed a trilateral negotiation format that includes Russia. What does this have to do with Ukraine sending soldiers to the Gulf region to shoot down Shahid drones? Simple. Ukraine is proving to the US that it can be far more useful as a direct ally than America may have realized. What we're seeing in all of this is Ukraine committing. As Trump derides NATO nations for doing nothing to help the US reopen the Strait of Hormuz, Ukraine is using its interceptor drones to take down one of the key weapons that Iran uses to keep that vital waterway closed. The US has to take notice. If Ukraine plays its cards right and commits more personnel to the Gulf that directly aid the US as they have been the nations that Ukraine is working with so far, we may see a new evolution in the relationship between Ukraine and the US. What Ukraine is doing in the Gulf right now could be key to convincing Trump that Ukraine should be helped more in its fight against Russia. Interceptors flying from American warships and protecting bases in Gulf nations could go a long way toward helping Ukraine against Russia. At the very least, Zelenskyy might be able to use Ukraine's willingness to get involved as a way to convince the US not to relieve its sanctions pressure on Russia. That's the long game for Ukraine. The one challenge it faces as it sends its soldiers to control interceptors in the Gulf is that Iran is furious. Iran's regime was already warning Ukraine to stay out of the Gulf conflict as far back as March 14th. That's when Iranian lawmakers labeled Ukraine a legitimate target due to Ukraine helping Israel with drones. Now Ukraine has gone a lot further. It has soldiers in the Middle East and they're helping several nations that are targets of Iran's ire. Could this mean that Iran will escalate against Ukraine? Perhaps. It would be difficult for Iran to do much of note, as it has its hands full with Operation Epic Fury. But if Ukraine resumes what it's doing in the Gulf now that the ceasefire between the US, Israel and Iran has collapsed, we may well see increased cooperation between Iran and Russia that affects Ukraine on its own turf. That seems to be a gamble that Ukraine is willing to take, and it stands to gain a lot more from what it's doing in the Gulf than it will lose by making Iran angry. Interceptor drones are proving valuable to Ukraine in more ways than one, and now it's even possible that Japan could enter the mix in the Gulf region. Not directly, of course. However, Japan is now providing Ukraine with a new type of interceptor drone that could end up finding its way into the Middle East if Ukraine chooses to deploy it there. Do you want to learn more about this new breed of interceptors? Well, check out our video, where we cover the deepening of Ukraine's partnership with Japan. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you are subscribed to The Military Show so you don't miss our analysis of the latest developments in Ukraine and the Gulf. And thank you, as always, for watching.